Okay, why don't we get started? Good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. It is great to have you with us, whether you are a CRF member, one of our education partners, our speakers, or coming to us from our platinum partner, CADEX, who is one of our speakers or are our speakers today. It is great to have everybody with us. Before I hand it off to my colleague, Mike Bevilacqua, just a couple of pieces of housekeeping real quick for you. First of all, we would love to have questions during today's webinar, and you can submit questions through the Q&A function, which is a toolbar on the toolbar for you. So if you mouse over your screen, you'll see the Q&A capability there. We would love to have questions during today's webinar, and we'll pause during the webinar to answer those for you. A copy of the slides will be shared with you along with a copy of today's recording. So this session is being recorded. We'll share that with you. Give us 24 hours to get that to you. It'll also be located on the CRF website or being provided to you by our education partners if you're coming to today's webinar through, again, through one of our education partners. Lastly, there will be a small survey at the end of the webinar, and we would ask you to take about 15 seconds out to answer that for you, for us. It's just a couple of questions. It allows us to evaluate the content. Did we have the right subject matter? How did the speakers do? As well as it gives you the ability to submit topics that are of interest to you so that we can make sure that we bring those to you throughout the remainder of the year. So with that, again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to pass it off to Mike Bevilacqua, and Mike's got some public service announcements for us, and then we'll get right on to the webinar. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Matt, and welcome to today's webinar. We're delighted to have you join and learn about what it takes to get difficult done in today's order-to-cash landscape. From invoicing and payment to dispute resolution and collections, we all know businesses face relentless complexity and rising consumer demands. And clearly, your customers are always looking for something special. So thanks for joining us to explore how AR trends, proactive upstream strategies, and flexible outsourcing models are reshaping O2C, driving its evolution to simplify processes, enhance cash flow, and empower financial practitioners to get difficult done. Today, we have Seth Carter, Chief Information Officer, Mandy Lewis, Senior Vice President of Global Operations, and Aaron Nelson, SVP of O2C Solutions. So a little bit about CADEX before we get into it. CADEX is a private PE-backed disruptor in the order-to-cash industry, focused on elevating service levels and delivering stronger business results. With a global reach, award-winning technology, and expertise across 20-plus industries, CADEX helps over 2,000 clients streamline O2C operations. Their comprehensive solutions optimize cash flow, reduce risk, and drive efficiency at scale. As a reminder, we want to make sure this is interactive and you're using that question button to ask our presenters questions. And before we turn it over to the CADEX team, I wanted to share we have quite a lineup of webinars, and I encourage you to check out our CRF website and view the upcoming ones. So next up, we have the value of partnering with sales and marketing on credit policies. We have Amex as our presenter coming up on March 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This session is with Amex Express B2B Client Management Merchant Team to hear best practices on how to balance customer satisfaction, close alignment with your marketing and sales counterparts while still implementing effective credit and payment policies. Also, as a calendar reminder, really coming up soon, March 17th through the 19th, we have our in-person forum at the Westin Bayview in San Diego with a content-rich agenda to help you navigate uncertainty with subjects covering high-risk mitigation strategies, PE insights, various leadership styles, ERP conversions, and hands-on AI experience in AR and credit. If you're planning to go, you want to make sure you get signed up. You're running out of time. Now it gives me great pleasure to turn this over to the CADEX team.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, CRF team, for hosting this discussion today, and thank you for all in attendance. My name is Aaron Nelson, As Mike said, I'm a Senior Vice President here at Cadex. I've spent 28 years with Cadex and one of our legacy brands, DNS Global Solutions. My main daily focus is working closely with our customers to help develop order-to-cash solutions. I will be acting as the moderator for today's discussion with two of my colleagues. Mandy, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Mandy Lewis, Senior Vice President of Global Operations for Cadex. I have more than 25 years experience in order to cash. I'm currently responsible for all of our early stage and BPO clients here at Cadex across a wide variety of industries. Very grateful to be here and definitely looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Mandy. Seth?
Yes, I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Cadex. I oversee our technology platforms and products, along with our data insights and analytics strategies. I've been in the financial services industry for about 16 years across commercial, consumer, and mortgage portfolios. And prior to that, I worked in academia as a behavioral economist.
Thanks, Seth. So let's get started by framing our discussion for today. What we want to share with you are some of the current trends we're seeing and what we've learned over decades of providing order-to-cash solutions that have helped our great clients to get difficult done. What we're seeing is a fundamental shift in the order-to-cash space. Credit teams are stretched more than ever. There's an increase in delayed payments, bad debt is on the rise, and compliance is more complex than ever. The challenges aren't new, but they are becoming harder to manage. And when order-to-cash operations are streamlined, the impact is real. It can lead to lost revenue, lost customers, and slower growth. Order-to-cash is not just an operational burden, it directly affects profitability. To help support these observations, we found a few interesting data points that we wanted to share. First off, VersaPay is reporting 4 million is lost every month on average due to outstanding invoices caused by disputes and communications breakdowns. A payments.com survey found 80% of executives say they've lost B2B customers due to payment miscommunication, which just confirms that poor billing experience erodes trust. And 3 to 5% of top-line revenue is lost annually to order-to-cash inefficiencies, according to McKinsey & Company. These reflect the real challenges we see every day. So what's driving the need for change? It's not just one factor, it's a combination of economic uncertainty, elevated customer expectations, and increased regulatory complexity. In our experience, we consistently see the same challenges when we get engaged. It's usually manual processes, spreadsheet-driven workflows, disconnected ERPs, and supporting all of this is supporting a reactive collection strategy that makes it harder to stay ahead. Most companies haven't fully solved this yet, but doing nothing is no longer an option. The expectations are higher and the risks are growing. So the real question is, how do you simplify processes, preserve cash flow, and drive faster results in an evolving landscape? That's where Order-to-Cash 2.0 comes in. It's not just a concept, it's about more proactive, customer-centric, and technology-driven approach to solving these challenges. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Before we go any further in discussing our solutions and our findings, Mandy and Seth, what are you guys seeing? How are these changes impacting AR, credit, and order management teams?
You know, from a technology standpoint, as solutions have become more modular and lightweight, we're seeing consumers increasingly expect that their payments can become more seamless. And, you know, you think about digital wallets, automation, self-service portals, you know, these are things that we're using in our everyday lives. You think about, you know, your Venmo, your Apple Pay, that sort of thing. We're using those all the time right now as consumers. But then what's happened is those expectations that we have as consumers are actually reshaping how we think about commercial order-to-cash processes as well, because we want to use those same tools if we're customers in a commercial order-to-cash scenario. So companies are looking for ways to make it easier for customers to pay before their accounts become overdue. So we're seeing a lot of demand in the market right now for things like self-service technologies. But it's not only about ease of use, but about the fact that people are now also used to individualized customer journeys. And what that means for providers is that we've got to begin thinking about more nuanced strategy paths for handling order-to-cash processes than we've had in the past.
No, I think that's exactly right, Seth. Technology is an enabler. It's a great enabler, but we have to first start by understanding our customers. It's all about the people and the processes. Later on, I'll tell you about a client that we've had great success with that started exactly there, understanding where the customer was currently and where we needed to take them. Because if we don't understand, if we don't start there, then the technology sometimes can even make things worse. Today, we're seeing even with advancements, payments are still slowing down. So clients are bringing us in earlier, not just for collections, but to build the strategies that help customers pay on time. It's about recovery, but it's ultimately about prevention.
Yeah, I almost see it as really it's about the intersection between operation strategy and technology. And I think focusing on just one side of that, just on technology, just on operation strategy alone, actually serves to the detriment of your overall operation. So it really does come down to, how do I focus on the intersection between those two? How do I build strategies and then build tools underneath that to support those strategies?
Absolutely.
I think it's worth mentioning as well, if anyone's paying attention to the current market situation, the growing impact of new tariffs, new trade policies, increasing the cost of goods and supply chains are constricting, which puts even more pressure on working capital. Businesses really can't afford to be inefficient in their order to cash processes today. Seth, you're our data guru. Please tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the downstream collections data and that would maybe suggest that a more proactive strategy is needed.
I think I agree with you completely. But before we go there, I just want to throw one more comment out, because we can't fail to miss or talk about regulation, right? We all know that the FDCPA regulates third-party collection, but today we also need to consider things like the Rosenthal Act, which apply to original creditors. Companies need to be sure they have a strong compliance strategy too. Otherwise, they could find themselves in a whole world of trouble and on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars in fines. So all of those things are really coming together, and we have to think about and driving change.
Yeah, and you see it obviously on the data privacy side as well, especially if you're doing business outside of the United States with GDPR regulations. We see increasing regulatory scrutiny and increasing care that has to be taken. And I do think in many ways, the commercial industry is beginning to mirror what you saw maybe 10, 15 years ago in the consumer industry in the mortgage space that I was in before, where these changes are coming, and we've got to be able to get ahead of them. And one way you get ahead of them is by having the right foundation overall in terms of your operational processes and your data structures. Speaking of the data, I'll share with you a few things that I put together here. Just to give you a sense of where the market seems to be going. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about late stage commercial debt collection. You'll see graphed in these bars here. These are a representation of number of accounts that we're seeing right now in late stage. The line part of the graph is the dollar amount of the overall aggregate portfolios year over year. I would certainly say you can look at this data with a lot of different lenses. I think different lenses that you apply to it can give you a sense of both macroeconomic trends as well as sort of the micro level trends of consumer motivation within the data. And I'll point out a couple of things here and would love for any discussion or questions on this. You obviously see in this data, looking at both the bars in terms of number of accounts and the line, you see the dip that came post-pandemic, which we, all have talked ad nauseum about at this point. I think you do see a lot of recovery from that. And in fact, you're actually seeing not only recovery, but you're beginning to see even more placements than pre-pandemic. This does correlate pretty well with what you find in like the credit card spaces and the consumer spaces, where you're beginning to see charge-offs that are approaching where we were even before the crash in 2008. I don't want to paint too negative a picture there, but I think it is something to just think about. I took these bars and organized them then by balance size segments. So you'll see the different colors here. Just one note on that green one, we'll fix this before the debt goes out. That should be $8,000 to $12,000 on the green. I just saw that as I'm looking at it here, but broke these out in terms of balance sizes or number of accounts based on these different balance size buckets. And from a trend standpoint, you see that for the most part, your smallest balances on average around $750 or less in late stage collections are staying pretty consistent. They've grown a little bit. Where your growth is really happening is actually in this $750 to $3,500 range, which is, in traditional late stage third party debt collection. It's sort of that grouping of accounts that's big enough not to be small balance, but really not big enough to typically go through like a legal remediation process either. That's the phase that seems to be growing a little bit more. But I think the important takeaway from this slide is that those small balances still make up, a very large portion of the average portfolio. Now, what I've done next to look at this kind of micro level trend is I've taken the recovery rates. So this is basically just cumulative liquidity curves for a 13-month plus liquidity in created batches for each of these balance buckets. And then I've broken that by the time period from 2019 to 2021, and then the time period from 2022 to 2023. So the last 3 years versus the 3 years before that. And when you look at this data, you see that in that previous 3-year bucket, 2019 to 2021, it was probably what most people in this late stage industry think of as the traditional curve here, right? You become less collectible as your balance sizes get bigger. But what I would note is that in this 2022 to 2024 data, you actually see some reversals. You see much more collectability now in these larger balances. And that's, I think, striking in and of itself. But then the other thing that really strikes me about this is you look at these curves, they've improved everywhere, except there's been a reversal in this less than $750 balance range. Those debts were actually more collectible in 2019 to 2021 than they are today. And I think this can give us some insight in terms of maybe what's going on with customers. And one of the ideas that we have is that it's very likely that if you think about this self-service concept, this idea of people wanting self-pay, those are the balance sizes that would be most applicable in that category. After all, you're probably not going to do a self-pay, for a debt that's greater than $20,000. You're probably going to need to speak to somebody to work it out. But in those smaller balances, there's an opportunity here for moving upstream and incorporating more self-service. What does that look like? It could be a better, self-service payment application. It could be going upstream and studying, for instance, how your disputes are happening and then creating different strategy paths to address those disputes. It could look like a lot of different things, but I do think it's a trend worth noting. So we wanted to call that out. If we move to the next slide, you'll see a little bit about the age, or I'm sorry, not about balance sizes, but about ages. And I think you still see a trend. And this is from CCA of A, you still see a trend in terms of length of delinquency in months since due date. So the typical age of debt trend still holds. And I think this is still instructive, though, for us, because the adage still holds that the sooner you can begin addressing that delinquency, the better off you are. And if you think about structured data models, there are even ways now to predict who will go delinquent before they go delinquent. And, that's your ultimate strategy for how you move upstream.
Hey, Seth.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Got a question for the Cadex team?
Sure.
How do you balance automation with the need for human decision-making in these complex O2C scenarios?
Yeah, and we can... It's an interesting question, Mike, right? Because where we are today with some of the, we'll call it AI, and we'll get into what that really means in a minute. But where we are today with that at large is that there are some really good tools that are out there for automating certain processes. And they can take a lot of what I would think of as kind of lower value work out of the chain so that you can automate. I think my advice for deploying those strategies right now is that they still are not set it and forget it, right? You still got to have somebody who can oversee that work, but you can definitely leverage them to automate processes and then utilize your human capital to basically do the higher order functions of reviewing that work and directing the strategy.
Yeah, and I just have to chime in here. That's a fantastic question, by the way, and it's a question that lots of companies are asking themselves. And as Seth already mentioned, some of the tools available out there are extremely sophisticated, and they can take on some more of these complex situations than one might think. But the way that I like to approach it really is sort of just as basic as the 80-20 rule, right? If we can utilize automation and AI to handle some of the a lion's share of the just simple tasks that we see that agents have to think about every day, then now you can put that through a funnel, and then what you end up with for the agents that have to really dig into and spend more time on is much lower. And so then by doing that, you've obviously freed up their time, you've definitely saved yourself money, and you can make the process more efficient overall. I think the key to it always is not thinking of it as, all or nothing. You need to look at each individual process and determine what exactly that you can peel off and what can be handled in a very automatic way, especially things that are repetitive, and you can clearly define the if-then strategies.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention before we move away from this slide, we've talking about age of the debt. That's extremely important. And at Cadex we handle early stage and late stage. We handle legal, BPO, all of those things. And my team is focused primarily on the earlier stages. And I talk all the time about the fact that we work our way out of a job, because frankly, the more that we can handle earlier on, the better off we are. We all know that without a doubt that the likelihood of collection is always going to be higher the earlier on we have intervention. And so that's where we really should be focusing on. We're trying to get in earlier on and find out exactly what the root cause is, and getting rid of any of the obstacles to payment. It might not be that it's a cash problem. We all know that. And so we need to be able to identify quickly in the process what problems or issues are keeping our customers from paying.
That's a great segue. So what we're gathering from Seth's data is that the late stage recovery is improving. Even though we'd love to take 100% credit for that, we still have to consider that it's a sign of too much cash being left on the table earlier in the process. Yeah. And first party and early stage strategies need to be more heavy lifting. As Mandy said, the best collections outcome is really when there isn't a need for it. The goal must be to solve payment issues before they become problems. And small balance just needs a smarter approach, like Seth was mentioning. The decline in small balance liquidation probably means there's methods that aren't working. So self-service, automation, predictive analytics, all those things could be implemented and hopefully recapture some of those dollars.
Absolutely. I want to throw in there, we have one particular client that for many, many years, and this is a huge agriculture company, feeds half the world, that where we were doing their third-party collections exclusively. And then after many years, they asked us to start looking at their early stage. When we got in, we actually saw that their third-party write-offs reduced by over 70% over 2 years. That was in excess of $26 million. Because of just taking a new look at the way that the early stage was being handled and putting in processes and technology to support that.
Absolutely. So ultimately, receivables should be treated as an asset and not an afterthought. And companies that are going to succeed in 2025 and beyond are the ones that move from reactive behaviors to proactive cash flow management, leveraging the technology, optimizing processes, and ensuring that customers have the opportunity to pay on time or earlier. That's what's getting difficult done and looks like in the year ahead. Seth, I recently read that roughly 14% of companies have completed steps towards modernization, yet 80% listed as a priority. What's the best place to begin when it comes to implementing technology?
Yeah, Aaron, I've heard similar stats. I recently read that 95% of respondents in a survey across a number of different business areas, 95% said that they wanted to put AI in their business in this year. They plan to, but only 20% of them actually could define what AI is. And I think, as scary as that stat is, I think it's exactly where a lot of companies are right now, because the whole AI ML space is so rich with buzzwords in marketing pitches and that sort of thing. What it means is that people become enamored with specific tools, and they start thinking about tools first and foundational approach second, which almost always ends up leading to issues. And compounding that, the market space right now for people that do data science and machine learning work, the most recent Bain Capital study on the market for labor there indicates that there's roughly a 40% gap between how many people are in the market and how many people are needed to support the market, which means that you are, as a business, typically going to be having to engage a partner for some of these functions. And it still makes sense, but you can end up in a place that leads you somewhere that isn't going to be very impactful for your business. So my recommendation is sort of a crawl, walk, run approach, which we've got spelled out here. Yep. And I'm not going to go into all of these details, but I'll kind of give you the highlights. What we recommend that people do is you start with this crawl phase of identifying your data. What are the critical metrics that you need to measure your business? And then once you identify those critical metrics across each of your different functions in your business, put into place a data model that will allow you to deploy those metrics across the business. And really a good outcome for this is simply a common reporting mechanism or a common reporting platform across using a data cube versus just your standard kind of silo reports. Once you have that data model in place, you can move from the crawl phase into the walk stage. And then what does the walk stage mean? It really means mapping out all of your core business processes and seeing where each one of those uses those different metrics across them. And then once you have them mapped out, you can start looking at those maps and saying, okay, where can I potentially begin putting in some modular tools, some tools to accommodate some of these things that we think of, today when we talk about automation, things like e-invoice reminders, automated email campaigns, self-service portals, that sort of thing. Once you get to the end of your walk stage, you really can now say, okay, I've got standard data, I've got standard process. Once you have those pieces in place, you can begin really thinking about how you deploy predictive analytics and kind of forecasting out what your portfolio is going to look like from a performance standpoint. And then once you get to the final stage, which is really this run stage, that's when you should probably start thinking about, okay, how do I deploy some of these tools that I've heard about, these AI tools? And what does that really look like? Well, it could be laying out your process maps and saying, okay, I can inject, some type of a AR recovery workflow here. I can inject an email parsing tool here. I can inject an AI-powered collector and virtual agent to cover this business function off. But you really have to understand what are your critical metrics that you're going to measure outcome on. That's the crawl stage. What do your processes look like? That's your walk stage. Then you can start thinking about where to selectively deploy those tools within those processes.
So Seth, we have a question.
Okay.
How do you get executive buy-in for the O2C transformation when finance leaders are already really stretched thin with other priorities? Because again, I really love this 3-step concept and getting from ideation to ultimately being able to roll it out. But there's so many other priorities out there. How do you break through? If you could maybe help the audience on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Mike, I think very often where we all falter in trying to present these types of opportunities to our organizations at large is that we focus only on internal efficiency gains. And, those internal efficiency gains sometimes may or may not actually end up providing more value to the company. So what you really need to do to make the case to your senior leadership here is to create ROI, to basically analyze what the return on investment is at each of these stages, because this is not an all or nothing thing, right? You can deploy certain parts of this without saying, hey, we've got to go build this massive elaborate program here. Maybe it starts as simple as saying, okay, today we're spending X amount of dollars and have all sorts of risk by running this antiquated crystal report server in our business. So if we move to a data cube and put Tableau or Looker or Power BI on top of that, we could share all of that reporting across our organization, and we only have to build something once. So now when a client needs a report, I don't have to go build a separate report for every client. I can build one, and I've got a standard for everybody. There's real value associated with that to the business, not only from a security standpoint and a source of truth standpoint, but from an actual return on investment. And when you break down what it costs to put these pieces in place, and compare that to what you could potentially gain downstream, I think that's how you make the case to your senior leadership.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Seth. So on the topic of AI, I see the AI-powered collector. Can you tell us what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So, right now, these AI agents, you probably have seen some of these in various marketing pitches. And I think where the industry is right now, it's really sort of in its earliest or most nascent stages. And it looks, in the earliest stages, looks almost like an improved version of an IVR. It's you can deploy these things pretty well for triaging incoming calls, for triaging email and work streams. But I think we're very quickly shifting from that and moving into a space now where the AI agents can begin doing some of those lower tier kind of work processes. And getting back to what we were talking about earlier, I think one of the interesting use cases I've seen right now is this idea of being able to train an AI model on your incoming emails, and then actually train the model to bifurcate or sort of triage those emails out to different operational teams that can then handle them. That's one example I've seen. I've seen a few models, and we're exploring those right now, where you can effectively take your call center recordings, your call recordings, train a model on those, and leverage the model to actually map your processes for you, which I think would be a huge help for a number of different organizations. So AI agents can mean a lot of different things, but at the simplest, just think of it as I've now got, I've got my workforce of, 500 FTE or however many FTE you have. And now I've got a 10-person team of AI agents that are literally just churning through a lot of these low value or time consuming, but low value add processes that still need to be done.
And that kind of goes right back to that earlier question we had about how we decide where we can utilize AI and automation and where humans have to come in, right? That's a great example where you using them for, like you said, for triaging, and then you determine from there who needs to step in. That's a great point. I just want to make sure before we move on, looking at this 3-stage process, we see companies at every stage of readiness. But for me, I really like to think about that crawl phase. That crawl phase is really critical. We see all the time companies that sort of kind of try to jump over that. In fact, we're dealing with one right now. They had several acquisitions, and so they were dealing with multiple different ERPs, and we all know kind of how painful that could be. And so obviously they wanted to get to a place where they were using one sort of system of truth and automation, and so they jumped right there, but unfortunately really didn't spend the time and the resources that they needed to mapping out their initial processes. And so what ended up happening, unfortunately, is the situation actually got much worse. Today, we're working with them to fix that foundation, so that way they can actually benefit from the automation that's currently on pause. So I think if we're going to really spend any time and really focus, it needs to be first and foremost on laying that really great foundation. Wouldn't you agree, Seth?
No, I would. I mean, I always tell this to our teams. I always tell them that building this foundation is really like building a winning football team where you're building from the lines out, right? You've got to have your offensive line, and then you build into your skill positions. And this foundation is the offensive line for any good company. And I know you love that, Mandy, since you're such a sports
I was about to say, you lost me right at the football analogy, but until then we were good, Seth. Good job.
So technology is a critical piece. We all agree on that. But it's not the full solution. Companies still face lots of challenges with resource constraints and manual processes and growing complexity. That's where a strategic partner can come in. Mandy, can you talk us through that?
Sure. I mean, I think, obviously we just need to think about these strategic partnerships and whether or not we're going to insource or outsource or whatnot. You just really got to look at what your company's needs are and understand that today, order to cash is or the outsourcing environment doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that, you're going to it's going to be hands-on or hands-off. It's flexible, a lot more flexible than people realize. We could bring in partners to handle just specific challenges. Maybe you're having some issues with staffing because of seasonal fluctuations. You're having trouble with your credit approvals or cash application. Because what we know is that order to cash is all interconnected, but we also know that we have to think about not only bringing in the money, but what is the customer experience look like overall. So again, when you're looking at whether or not you want to insource or outsource or whatnot, you need to understand whether or not you're looking for short-term support. You need additional capacity, targeted expertise, and if you feel like that you don't have the visibility that you need, that you're probably working with the wrong partner. So it's really just starts with understanding what it is that you're trying to accomplish for the long run.
Some companies still hesitate to outsource because they think it's too expensive or too rigid. But the approach is different today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, it's not all or nothing. I mean, every time that whenever I'm talking to a new client, I'm always thinking about what are their unique business situations, and what do we need to do to kind of put together that right recipe. And so sometimes we see clients that are they're having some clear signs that they just need help. They're falling behind on their key order to cash processes. They're struggling with fluctuating volumes. They're just not being able to handle it in a consistent fashion. And so in those cases, it might be that they just need to bring somebody in for part of the processes. And if they're if they're seeing that there's a problem across the board and they're just not being able to do it, then it might be that that a true continue outsource. It might be something that they want to look at, a full service order to cash outsourcing model.
And to your earlier point, it's not uncommon for us to work ourselves out of a job sometimes because, it is a short-term bridge. And from that standpoint, the cost is termed. So when a company's considering external support versus internal support, what are some of the key indicators?
Yeah. So again, if they're finding that keeping that consistent staff is a problem, or if in different times of the year they need exponentially more staff than at other times, obviously that's extremely costly. So they might want to look at an external partner who can help with that, and certainly an external BPO is going to be able to fit that need better than, say, like a staffing company, something like that. If they're seeing that they're having certain areas in the process where they're really failing, it might make sense to have an outsourced partner who has the expertise. Maybe they find that their process overall is working, but it could be that cash application is an issue and they just aren't able to get it right. Maybe they don't want to spend the resources or the time to handle that, and so again, they can use somebody who already has those expertise. Also, maybe it's technology. I mentioned earlier, if you've got multiple different systems, an outsourced partner can usually bring all of those things into one place for you. Could be that you don't have the compliance knowledge that you need to have, and you maybe don't have somebody internally that you can turn to. Any of those things are good indicators that you probably should be looking for help outside. I mean, it's very few companies who really have all of those different pieces that allows them to scale in a way that makes sense in every single situation.
Mandy, quick question.
Yeah.
Along those technology lines, what's the most common tech implementation mistake companies make when trying to modernize the O2C function?
I see all the time that companies buy an off the shelf product that they're going to use for their O2C, but they don't have their processes are all disjointed. They don't have anything documented. Everything is stored in somebody's head or in spreadsheets and all over the place. And so they just, to go back to Seth's earlier slide, they're trying to walk or run before they even begin to crawl. And so that ends up being a very costly mistake, both in terms of, what it costs to buy the product, right? But also in all of the man hours and the rework that's involved in something like that.
And Mandy, where I've seen it where I've seen it really fail like that is in cases where not only do they not have the processes documented first, but the company is viewing adding a new technology component as basically a complete replacement of what they had before. So what I mean by that is, I've seen clients where they'll move to a new BPM, just their everyday kind of BPM, and they may not have anything documented. And they come to us, they said, well, hey, we would love to work with you guys, but we just moved to this new BPM, so we're going to be working out of this now. And it's kind of an outdated mindset where you think about the fact that, in the old days, you moved to a system, you did a system conversion, you migrated to that BPM. But where technology is today, it really, you're somewhat BPM agnostic, and BPMs don't have to be monolithic. You can build modules that bolt onto somebody's BPM that still empower some of these things we're talking about, even if they're on a system that's really archaic. And I would add too, in those cases where you see those failures, remember that the right outsourcing partner can come in and help you build those process maps. They can come in and help you analyze your process, analyze where to create the automation, build that reporting model. If you're dealing with fragmented ERPs, I mean, we have clients right now where they're very large multinational companies, but they all have their own IT silos with their own data. So they literally send us all of their data, and we do the combination for them and build the reporting for them so they can see what's happening across their life cycle. There are a lot of really creative things that you can do when it comes to technology that aren't just about migrating systems.
Sounds like talking to you folks who've had that experience would be a big help in terms of really avoiding some of those issues. Thank you.
No problem.
Mandy, what about seasonality?
Well, again, I go back to an earlier example I gave about that agriculture company. Seasonality can be a big problem for companies, and being able to staff to that appropriately, because one time of the year things might be really quiet, and so you don't want to have an overage of staff. And so that was a great example. When you're dealing with a partner who can scale their staff up and down really easily, that can definitely smooth it out. We had another situation, actually a fairly recent example that I can give you, with a large college bookstore. They were having trouble recovering unreturned textbook rentals. Now you can obviously understand there's a lot of seasonality involved in that. And then add to that, so they had staffing issues and trying to manage the volumes, but add to that the fact that they were trying to reach college kids by calling them on the telephone. That doesn't always work so great. I don't know too many 22-year-olds who like to answer phone calls from people that they don't recognize. And so when they got us involved, we took a look at that. And again, we looked at the customer and what who their clients were, and what the situation was. We were very easily able to handle the seasonality, of course, because we can scale so quickly. But then we also layered in technology. And so what we ended up doing is that we automated our customer outreach using text messaging and emails with a link that they could click on. There was no need for them to log in or remember passwords, anything like that. And we were actually able to get to a point where 87% of those payments that we complete for that client are done by self-service. We also increased their recovery rates by over 40%. And then obviously the workload for their internal teams really went down to nothing. We were driving all of the inbound volume rather than even doing a whole lot of outbound calling whatsoever. So that's a great example of how outsourcing can solve multiple problems. Originally, the problem they thought was just the seasonality, but we came up with a whole solution that combined people, processes, and technology, and ended up with a really great outcome.
And Mandy, if I can add one thing to that, if it's the one I'm thinking of, and I think it is, going back to that original data I showed with those balances of less than $750, those balances were majority less than $750, right? And when I compare that particular client to the rest of our portfolio, their recoveries were about 30 to 40% higher because of that heavy use of self-service that client allowed, which was pretty interesting, I think.
Well, and Seth, you know what? This is another example too. Somebody asked the question earlier about getting the buy-in, and how do you sell that? Well, this is,
Mhm.
I mean, these book rentals, they're not a huge amount. Each one, I think the average balance was less than $50. And so when you think about that, and you have tens of thousands of accounts that are less than $50, you're not going to be able to sell to anybody that you just want to keep adding staff, right? You
Exactly.
can't do
It'd be a
that. Doesn't
horrible
make
idea to
sense.
do that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. So when you start thinking about an outsourced partner who can offer you the technology, that's a real easy sell and a return on investment. Um, so that's outsourcing. Insourcing.
Yep.
When does insourcing work best? I mean, insourcing works best. I would say first and foremost, you have really strong processes, you have consistency, you've got the right staff, and then you have to have a really strong technology presence. Wouldn't you agree to that, Seth?
Yeah, I would. I mean, and sometimes that can be difficult. And again, I would say even if you're insourcing, think modularly with your technology. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? You can always create kind of a hybrid model even at that point.
Yeah.
All great points. So I know we jumped a little bit ahead with your example of the when it's best to outsource, and it's a great example of how proactive solutions, leveraging technology, being customer centric, can really optimize an order to cash process. In conclusion, the order to cash process is a complex challenge, and if any of these challenges resonate with you, we'd be happy to meet. Whether it's automation, analytics, or strategic partnerships, we can help you get difficult done. A little bit about Cadex that you haven't heard of maybe already. We are full service order to cash provider, and we are trusted by over 2,000 companies and have award-winning proprietary technology and a global reach. Our mission is to make the process easier for you, to remove friction so cash can keep flowing. If you'd like to connect with us, you can visit our website, follow us on LinkedIn, or meet some of our team at the upcoming CRF event. We'll be participating in a breakout session on March 17th, which is Monday from 9 to 10. Again, thank you for attending, and we'll use the last bit of our time here to take any other questions.
Yeah, no new questions. Really great presentation. I think as I was listening to you folks, a lot of experience between the three of you, and maybe some folks are thinking, the Cadex is just really about third-party collections, but clearly I can tell, and from what you shared with us, there's other pieces of the OTC business that you're well engaged in and could really help practitioners as they're thinking about, answering the resource question, which I know you all brought up, in terms of, what else could you be doing? And then some of that seasonality flux, maybe where there's first party collections that need some help. And as we all know that we've been in the business a while, the sooner you get to those, the more likelihood of getting them collected, which is, again, another great strategy that folks could be thinking about, and having a partner be able to provide periodic services when needed, especially if it's seasonality, or if there was a lot of turnover, or if there was a change in a system. A lot of things that happen over the course of time where clearly this group can help. And I think one of the most important things, and you hit on it really, really well, was that, the credit person really needs to have a seat at the table and be able to influence the organization to make changes based on a really good ROI. And you clearly shared that here today. So I wanted to thank you all for sharing this insight and helping our folks better understand some things that they could be doing. And you taking your time out today to educate and bring things forward for them to make their worlds better. So I thank the Cadex team. I just want to remind everyone to please complete the survey at the end, so the folks can get feedback on the information they provided. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Closing comments. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.